On a snowy Christmas Eve, 8-year-old Charlie is abandoned at a bustling train station, clutching a mysterious, unopened gift from his mother, who tearfully promises to return. Taken in by Claire, a kind-hearted single mom, Charlie finds safety and warmth. But his world is shaken when his estranged father appears, claiming custody, and his struggling mother resurfaces to fight for his love. As the battle for Charlie's future unfolds, secrets are revealed, hearts are tested, and bonds are forged in ways no one could predict. Will Charlie's mother prove she deserves a second chance, or will her past mistakes cost her everything? And will Claire's unwavering love be enough to protect Charlie from the forces pulling him away? The icy wind howled through the streets of the city, slipping between the gaps of scarves and mittens, biting into every exposed patch of skin. Inside the sprawling, dimly lit train station, holiday travelers hurried past, their faces hidden behind layers of wool and the urgency of their destinations. The massive clock above the central ticket booth ticked away seconds with a somber, mechanical rhythm, underscoring the unyielding passage of time. In the corner of the bustling station, sitting on a battered bench too large for his small frame, 8-year-old Charlie clutched a square, neatly wrapped gift. The red paper had started to crumple at the edges, and the golden ribbon dangled loosely, but his grip on it was unyielding. His wide eyes scanned the crowd, hopeful at first, then increasingly desperate as hour after hour passed. Snowflakes drifted in from the station's arched doors, collecting in his curls and melting against the flushed roundness of his cheeks. Charlie's mother, Rachel, had kissed him on the forehead and told him to wait. "I'll be back before you know it, sweetheart," she had whispered, her voice trembling like the quivering flame of a candle caught in a draft. Her arms had wrapped around him one last time, clutching him as though the weight of the world was about to pull her away. Then she had turned and vanished into the sea of winter coats and luggage, her figure swallowed by the snowy night beyond the doors. Now, as the station emptied little by little, Charlie's fragile faith began to waver. His stomach growled, the echoes of conversations and the screech of departing trains ringing hollowly in his ears. He wasn't sure what time it was, but the lights above flickered, casting long shadows over the tiled floors, and the cold gnawed through his too-thin jacket. "Excuse me, sweetheart." The voice was soft, carrying a warmth that cut through the frosty air. Charlie looked up to see a woman in a ticket booth, her dark eyes full of concern. She was in her mid-30s, her curly hair pulled back in a low bun beneath her knit hat. "Are you waiting for someone?" Charlie hesitated, gripping the gift tighter. "My mom," he mumbled, barely audible. The woman, Claire, stepped out of the booth and crouched beside him, her smile gentle but tinged with worry. "It's getting late. Are you hungry?" Charlie nodded reluctantly, his small shoulders slumping in relief when Claire extended her hand. "Come on, let's find something warm to drink." In the station's staff room, a humble space lit by a flickering fluorescent bulb, Claire handed Charlie a steaming cup of hot chocolate. He cradled it with both hands, letting the heat seep into his frozen fingers. "What's your name, honey?" she asked. "Charlie," he said softly before adding, "She told me not to open it until Christmas morning." He glanced at the gift on the table. Claire leaned back, the corners of her lips curving slightly. "That sounds like a special gift. Your mom must love you a lot." "She does," Charlie replied, but the uncertainty in his tone was like a pinprick to Claire's heart. She knew the signs. She'd seen the quiet, haunted looks on faces of the lost and left behind. And though she didn't press further, her instincts told her there was more to the story than Charlie could yet explain. Hours later, after the station doors closed for the night and Claire was wrapping up her shift, the thought of leaving Charlie on that bench haunted her. Outside, the snowstorm had intensified, the wind wailing against the old station windows. "I can't let you stay here," she said finally. "It's not safe." Charlie hesitated. "But what if she comes back?" Claire crouched to his level. "If she comes back, I'll make sure she knows where you are. You can trust me, Charlie. I won't leave you alone." Though his bottom lip quivered, Charlie nodded, and for the first time since Rachel had disappeared, he let someone take his hand. The farmhouse Claire shared with her parents sat on the outskirts of town, surrounded by fields blanketed in snow. Inside, it was a patchwork of warmth and imperfection, with threadbare rugs and walls lined with family photographs. Claire's parents, Margaret and Frank, had lived there their whole lives, their weathered faces softened by years of hard work and steady love. When Claire arrived with Charlie in tow, Margaret raised a questioning brow, but one look at the boy was all it took for understanding to settle. "Poor thing," Margaret murmured, pulling a chair closer to the fire for him. Frank simply nodded, his quiet nature masking the worry etched into his features. And then there was Lily, Claire's 7-year-old daughter, peeking out from behind her mother's coat, her eyes flicking from Charlie to the gift in his lap. "Who's he?" Lily asked bluntly, her curiosity unrestrained. "He's a friend," Claire said softly, "and he's staying with us for a little while." As the wind howled outside, the farmhouse glowed with light and warmth, but Charlie's eyes lingered on the frosted windows. Somewhere out there, his mother was walking alone in the storm. Would she come back? Or was he truly alone now? The snowstorm raged through the night, its fierce howling winds rattling the windows of the farmhouse. Inside, the fire crackled, its warm light dancing across the walls, casting flickering shadows that seemed alive. Charlie sat on the worn couch, the unopened gift clutched tightly to his chest. The house was quiet now. Claire had tucked Lily into bed after reading her a story, and her parents had retreated to their room, leaving her alone with Charlie in the soft glow of the living room. Claire sat across from him in an armchair, nursing a cup of tea. She watched him carefully, her heart aching for the boy who looked so small against the vastness of the old couch. She had tried to coax more of his story from him, but he spoke sparingly, his words measured as though each one might cost him something he couldn't afford to lose. "You know," Claire said gently, breaking the silence, "I have a little girl, about your age. Her name's Lily. She's pretty good at making friends, though she might be a bit bossy sometimes." Charlie's gaze flicked up to meet hers, and Claire thought she saw the faintest hint of a smile tug at his lips, but it vanished as quickly as it came, and his fingers tightened around the box. "She likes drawing," Claire continued, her voice soft and steady, like the lull of waves against a shore. "Do you like drawing, Charlie?" He nodded, his curls bouncing slightly with the motion. "I do," he said, so quietly she almost didn't hear him. "Mom says I'm good at it." "I'm sure you are," Claire replied, smiling. "Maybe you can show Lily some of your drawings tomorrow. She'd like that." Charlie didn't answer, his gaze drifting back to the window where snowflakes clung to the glass, shimmering like tiny crystals. Claire followed his line of sight, her chest tightening at the faraway look in his eyes. He was waiting, for his mother, for answers, for something he couldn't yet put into words. Claire leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "Charlie, do you know where your mom might have gone?" The question hung in the air like a fragile ornament, teetering on the edge of shattering. For a moment, Claire thought he wouldn't answer. But then, his voice broke through the stillness, small and uncertain. "She said she had to do something important," he whispered. "She said she'd be back, but she was crying." The words pierced through Claire like a sharp wind. She swallowed the lump forming in her throat and reached out to gently place her hand over his. His fingers, small and cold, tensed under her touch, but didn't pull away. "She loves you, Charlie," Claire said firmly. "Whatever's going on, I know she loves you." Charlie looked at her then, his eyes wide and shimmering with unshed tears. "What if she doesn't come back?" Claire's heart broke in that moment, but she held his gaze, her voice steady even as her own emotions churned. "If she doesn't," she said softly, "you're not alone. You have me, and Lily, and my family. We'll figure it out together." The next morning, the storm had calmed, leaving the world outside blanketed in a pristine sheet of white. The farmhouse seemed to glow against the winter landscape, its warmth a stark contrast to the icy stillness outside. Inside, the smell of pancakes and maple syrup wafted through the air, drawing Lily and Charlie to the kitchen table. Lily stared at Charlie as they ate, her curiosity as bright and unfiltered as the morning sun. "Why were you at the train station?" she asked. Her fork paused midair. "Lily," Claire said in a warning tone, but Charlie surprised her by answering. "I was waiting for my mom," he said simply, his voice void of emotion. Lily tilted her head, studying him. "Did she forget about you?" "Lily!" Claire's voice was sharper this time, and Lily shrank back in her seat, muttering an apology. But Charlie didn't seem upset. If anything, he looked resigned, as though he had asked himself the same question 100 times already. "It's okay," Charlie said quietly. "I don't know." Margaret, who had been flipping pancakes at the stove, glanced over her shoulder, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're safe here, love," she said, her voice as soothing as a lullaby. "That's what matters." Charlie nodded, but the weight of his unspoken thoughts hung heavy in the room. Later that afternoon, Evan arrived at the farmhouse, his arrival announced by the sound of his old truck rumbling up the driveway. He burst through the door in a flurry of cold air and snow, his free-spirited energy filling the house. At 25, Evan was the youngest of Claire's siblings, with a mischievous grin and an easy charm that made him a favorite among children. "Who's this little guy?" he asked, crouching to Charlie's level. Charlie hesitated, glancing at Claire for reassurance. "This is Charlie," she said. "He's staying with us for a bit." Evan's grin widened. "Well, Charlie, it's good to meet you. How do you feel about sledding? There's a hill out back that's practically begging for us to try it." Charlie blinked, surprised by the invitation. Before he could answer, Lily chimed in excitedly. "I want to go too." In the hours that followed, the sound of laughter echoed across the snow-covered fields as Evan, Lily, and Charlie took turns hurtling down the hill. For a little while, the weight on Charlie's small shoulders seemed to lighten, his laughter ringing out like bells on a frosty morning. But as the sun began to set and the sky turned a pale shade of lavender, Claire watched Charlie retreat back into himself. His gaze wandered to the horizon, where the snow-covered trees stood like sentinels guarding a secret. And once again, Claire wondered, where was Rachel, and why had she left her son behind? The days passed in a blur of frosty mornings and fire-lit evening. Charlie remained quiet, but he began to settle into life at the farmhouse, his small presence weaving itself into the fabric of the family's routine. He helped Margaret peel potatoes in the kitchen, listened to Frank's stories about the farm's early days, and even joined Lily in her drawings, though his sketches were often of snowy train stations and distant figures. Despite his tentative steps toward comfort, the weight of his mother's absence lingered, casting a shadow over even the warmest moments. It was especially noticeable in the evenings, when Claire would find him sitting by the window, the small gift still unopened, his face illuminated by the pale glow of moonlight on the snow. On the 5th day, a knock at the door shattered the fragile peace. Claire answered, her heart sinking when she saw a tall police officer standing on the porch, his uniform crisp against the cold. "Claire," the officer said, tipping his hat. "I'm Officer Delgado. I'm here about the boy." Claire's grip on the door tightened. "What about him?" Delgado sighed, his expression softening. "A traveler at the station reported seeing a child left alone. Child Services was notified and they've asked me to check on his welfare." Claire's stomach churned. She had known this might happen, but the reality of it hit harder than she'd anticipated. "He's fine," she said firmly. "He's with me and my family. He's safe." Delgado nodded, glancing over her shoulder into the cozy warmth of the farmhouse. "I don't doubt that, but it's protocol. I'll need to speak with the boy, and a social worker will be in touch soon." Reluctantly, Claire stepped aside and called Charlie. He appeared at the doorway, his small frame dwarfed by the officer's towering presence. Delgado crouched to meet his eye level, his voice kind but probing. "Hey there, buddy," Delgado said. "Can you tell me your name?" "Charlie," he answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "And do you know where your mom is, Charlie?" Charlie hesitated, his fingers twisting the hem of his sweater. "She said she'd come back," he mumbled. "But she hasn't yet." The officer nodded, his expression somber. "Okay, son. That's all I needed to know." After a brief exchange with Claire, Delgado left, but not before warning her that Child Services would be sending someone within the next few days. As the door closed behind him, Claire felt the weight of uncertainty settle over her like a heavy blanket. The visit from Delgado left everyone on edge. Margaret busied herself with chores, her hands working furiously as though scrubbing floors and peeling vegetables could keep the looming threat at bay. Frank retreated to the barn, his silence speaking volume. Even Lily seemed subdued, her usual chatter replaced by quiet glances in Charlie's direction. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, the tension was palpable. Charlie pushed his food around his plate, his appetite lost. Claire reached out and gently touched his hand. "It's going to be okay," she said softly. "We're not going to let anything happen to you." Charlie nodded, but the uncertainty in his eyes lingered. Claire's resolve hardened. She wouldn't let him be taken, not when he had already been through so much. 2 days later, the knock at the door came again. This time, it was a woman in her 40s, wearing a neat gray coat and holding a clipboard. She introduced herself as Ms. Hampton, a social worker assigned to Charlie's case. Her polite smile barely masked the firmness of her purpose. "I'm here to conduct a welfare check," Ms. Hampton said. "May I come in?" Claire let her in, her heart pounding. Ms. Hampton's sharp eyes took in every detail of the house, the cozy living room, the fire crackling in the hearth, the family photographs on the walls. When she finally turned to Charlie, who stood clutching the back of a chair, her expression softened. "Hello, Charlie," she said. "I'm here to make sure you're okay. Can I ask you a few questions?" Charlie glanced nervously at Claire, who gave him an encouraging nod. Slowly, he answered the social worker's questions, his voice steady despite the anxiety flickering in his eyes. Ms. Hampton listened carefully, taking notes. When the questioning was over, Ms. Hampton addressed Claire. "I can see he's being cared for here, but this is a temporary situation. Until we locate his mother or another legal guardian, Charlie will need to be placed in foster care." "No," Charlie said suddenly, his voice trembling. "I don't want to go. I want to stay here." Claire stepped forward, her voice firm. "He's not going anywhere. I'm willing to foster him myself." Ms. Hampton hesitated. "It's not that simple. There's a process. You'll need to file the proper paperwork and pass a home evaluation." Margaret, who had been standing quietly by the kitchen, spoke up. "You'll find no better place for that boy than here. Claire's a good mother and we're a good family." Ms. Hampton frowned, her professional demeanor cracking slightly under the weight of Margaret's conviction. "I'll see what I can do," she said finally. "But this will be temporary, pending further investigation." As she left, Charlie clung to Claire's side, his small hands gripping her sweater. Claire wrapped her arms around him, her jaw set with determination. Whatever it took, she would fight to keep him safe. That night, as the storm clouds gathered again on the horizon, Charlie sat by the fire with Lily, a crayon in his hand. Together, they drew pictures of snowy hills and warm houses. But when Lily wasn't looking, Charlie added a small figure to the edge of his drawing. A woman standing alone in the snow, her face turned away. Claire watched from the kitchen, her chest tightening at the sight. She knew that no matter how much love they gave him, part of Charlie's heart would always be searching for his mother. And as much as she wanted to shield him from more pain, she couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel's story wasn't over yet. The winter deepened, snow piling high along the edges of the farmhouse driveway. Charlie settled into the rhythm of life with Claire's family, but the uncertainty about his future loomed, like the bitter wind that seemed to seep through the cracks no matter how tightly the windows were shut. Ms. Hampton's visits became routine, her clipboard a constant reminder of the precariousness of Charlie's situation. One morning, as the frost clung stubbornly to the glass panes, Margaret pulled Claire aside. "We need to act quickly," she said in a low voice. "That boy has been through enough. You've got to make your case to foster him permanently." Claire nodded, though her heart was heavy with doubt. The process was overwhelming. Background checks, home evaluations, and the unspoken judgment of people who didn't know her, Charlie, or the bond they were building. But she couldn't let him slip through the cracks of a system that often didn't care enough. The tension in the house began to show in small but noticeable ways. Lily, once delighted to have Charlie as a playmate, started growing frustrated. She resented the attention her mother and grandparents poured into him and struggled to hide her jealousy. "You spend all your time with him," Lily blurted one evening, her cheeks flushed with anger. "He's not even part of our family." Claire crouched to meet her daughter's eyes, her voice calm but firm. "Lily, he's part of this family as long as he's with us, and we're lucky to have him here. He needs us right now." Lily scowled, tears brimming in her eyes. "But I need you too," she whispered before running to her room, slamming the door behind her. Claire's heart broke. torn between her daughter's feelings and her commitment to Charlie. She wanted to reassure Lily, but how could she when the outcome of this situation was so uncertain? A few days later, the uncertainty deepened. The sound of tires crunching on the icy driveway sent everyone to the windows. A tall man with broad shoulders climbed out of a weathered truck. His face was sharp and weathered, his posture confident. When he knocked on the door, Claire felt her stomach churn. The man introduced himself as Tom, Charlie's father. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Tom explained that he had learned about Charlie's situation through a mutual acquaintance and had come to take custody of his son. But his words were too smooth, his eyes too calculating. Claire's instincts flared with suspicion. "Where have you been all this time?" Margaret demanded, her voice laced with steel. Tom shrugged, his expression indifferent. "I've been working. Driving trucks, mostly. I couldn't take care of a kid back then, but I'm stable now." Charlie stood frozen in the corner, his eyes wide with confusion and fear. Claire knelt beside him, placing a protective hand on his shoulder. "Do you know him, Charlie?" she asked gently. Charlie shook his head, his voice trembling. She said he left us." Tom's jaw tightened. "I didn't abandon you, kid. Your mom made choices I couldn't live with." Claire stood, squaring her shoulders. "If you care about Charlie, then you'll do what's best for him. He's been through enough already." Tom smirked. "What's best for him is being with his father." The tension crackled in the room, each word another piece of kindling on an already roaring fire. Margaret stepped forward, her presence commanding. "If you want to take this to court, you'll have to prove you're fit to care for him. And from where I'm standing, you've got a lot of explaining to do." Tom narrowed his eyes but said nothing, retreating to his truck with a promise. "I'll be back." That night, Charlie barely spoke. Claire sat with him by the fire, her voice steady as she reassured him that he wouldn't be sent anywhere he didn't want to go. But the fear in his eyes lingered, and Claire knew that Tom's arrival had stirred something fragile within him. The next day, Ms. Hampton arrived earlier than expected. "Tom's claim complicates things," she admitted as they sat in the kitchen. "As Charlie's biological father, he has rights. The court will want to hear his case." Claire's frustration bubbled to the surface. "And what about what Charlie wants? He doesn't know this man. He's terrified of him." Ms. Hampton sighed, her expression weary. "The court considers the child's welfare, but biological connections carry weight. If Tom can prove he's stable, the judge might grant him custody." The conversation left Claire reeling. Her family gathered in the living room that evening, the weight of the situation pressing down on all of them. "We'll fight this," Margaret said firmly. "He's not taking that boy away." Frank nodded, his quiet strength a steadying presence. "We'll do whatever it takes." But Claire couldn't ignore the mounting challenges. Lily's growing resentment, Tom's sudden appearance, and the ever-present uncertainty of Rachel's whereabouts. All of it was pushing her to her limits. Still, she knew one thing for certain: she wouldn't give up on Charlie. As the days turned into weeks, the court date loomed closer. Charlie's drawings grew darker, his sketches now filled with jagged lines and shadowy figures. One night, as Claire tucked him into bed, he finally spoke what had been weighing on him. "Do you think my mom left because of me?" he asked, his voice breaking. The question tore through Claire like a blade. She sat on the edge of his bed, brushing his curls back gently. "No, sweetheart. Whatever your mom is going through, it's not your fault. You're a wonderful boy, and she loves you." Charlie clung to her then, his small body trembling with the force of his tears. Claire held him close, whispering promises she hoped she could keep. "I won't let anyone take you away," she said softly. "You're safe here." Outside, the snow began to fall again, blanketing the world in silence. But inside the farmhouse, the storm within was far from over. The courtroom felt colder than the snow-draped streets outside. The walls were stark and clinical, the kind of place where decisions were made that forever changed lives. Claire sat at a table beside her lawyer, her hands folded tightly to keep them from trembling. Across the room sat Tom, his demeanor self-assured, his lawyer flipping through a folder with mechanical precision. Charlie sat in the back, flanked by Margaret and Frank. His eyes darted between Claire and Tom, confusion and fear etched into his young face. Lily wasn't there. Claire had decided the courtroom wasn't a place for a child to witness such tension. "Are both parties ready?" the judge asked, his gravelly voice cutting through the silence. Tom's lawyer rose, confidently presenting Tom as a reformed man who had struggled in the past but was now capable of providing a stable home. "Mr. Tom has worked tirelessly to build a better life," the lawyer stated. "He has a steady income, a clean record, and he is the biological father of the child in question," Claire's lawyer countered with equal determination. "While Mr. Tom's efforts to reform are commendable, they don't negate the years of absence from his son's life. Meanwhile, my client Claire has provided Charlie with a loving, stable environment. We believe removing him from her care would cause undue emotional harm." The arguments volleyed back and forth, but the true turning point came when the judge addressed Charlie. His small frame seemed even smaller as he stood, his voice barely audible when asked how he felt about the situation. "I like living with Claire," he said, his eyes fixed on the floor. "And Lily and Margaret and Frank, they make me feel safe." "And what about your father?" the judge asked gently. Charlie hesitated, his gaze flickering to Tom. "I don't know him," he said finally. "He wasn't there before, but I miss my mom." Tom's expression darkened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. Claire noticed it, and so did the judge. The moment passed quickly, but the damage was done. The courtroom drama didn't end there. Rachel's absence loomed over the proceedings like a specter, her name invoked by both sides as a critical piece of the puzzle. Tom used her struggles to paint himself as the more stable option, while Claire's lawyer argued that Rachel's absence didn't invalidate the bond she shared with her son. The next twist came unexpectedly. As the judge prepared to adjourn for the day, the courtroom doors swung open and Rachel walked in. Her appearance stunned the room into silence. She looked worn, her clothes slightly frayed, her face pale from the cold, but her eyes were sharp, blazing with a determination that even Claire hadn't expected. "I'm Rachel," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm Charlie's mother." The judge allowed her to speak, and Rachel told her story, not the polished version Claire might have hoped for, but the raw, unvarnished truth. She spoke of the nights spent in shelters, of the jobs lost because of her unstable housing, and of the moment she left Charlie at the train station. "I didn't leave him because I didn't love him," Rachel said, her voice breaking. "I left because I thought he'd be better off without me, but I was wrong, and I've been trying to get back to him ever since." Her words hung in the air, heavy with pain and regret. Claire saw the way Charlie's eyes filled with tears, his small hands clutching the edge of the bench. For all the love he had found in Claire's home, the bond with his mother was something he couldn't simply erase. Tom, however, seized the moment to discredit Rachel further. "She's unstable," he said, his tone harsh. "She's the reason he ended up abandoned in the first place." Rachel didn't flinch. Instead, she turned to the judge, her voice firm. "I know I've made mistakes, but I'm here now, and I just want what's best for my son. If that means he stays with Claire, I'll accept that, but I won't let Tom take him. He left us when we needed him most." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, the judge calling for order. Claire watched Rachel with a mixture of admiration and heartbreak. For all her flaws, Rachel's love for Charlie was undeniable. Later that evening, back at the farmhouse, the family tried to process what had happened. Rachel had followed them back, though she stayed outside, leaning against the porch railing. Claire stepped out to join her, the cold biting at her cheeks. "I don't know what happens next," Rachel admitted, her breath fogging in the frigid air. "But thank you for taking care of him." Claire studied her, searching for the right words. "He needs you in his life," she said finally. "But he also needs stability. We can give him that." Rachel nodded, her shoulders slumping under the weight of her guilt. "I just want him to be happy." As they stood there, the door creaked open, and Charlie stepped out. He hesitated, his gaze shifting between the two women, before rushing to his mother and burying his face in her coat. Rachel's arms wrapped around him, her tears falling silently into his hair. From the doorway, Claire watched the reunion, her heart heavy but hopeful. This wasn't the resolution she had imagined, but it was the beginning of something new, a fragile hope, like the first light breaking through a stormy sky. Inside the house, the phone rang. its shrill tone piercing the quiet. Margaret answered, her expression darkening as she listened. When she hung up, her voice carried the weight of the next blow. Tom's fighting harder than we thought. The court wants to hear more from him, and from us. The storm wasn't over yet. The air inside the farmhouse was heavy with tension. Rachel had stayed, sleeping on the living room couch to avoid the bitter cold. Charlie seemed torn, his loyalties pulled between his mother and the newfound family that had given him stability. The court case loomed larger, with Tom escalating his efforts to take Charlie. His lawyer had filed motions questioning Claire's suitability as a foster parent, citing her financial challenges and single-parent status. Claire sat at the kitchen table late into the night, papers spread before her. Her lawyer had warned her about the difficulty of fighting Tom's claim. The system often favored biological parents even when their track record was spotty at best. "Claire," Margaret said softly, placing a hand on her daughter's shoulder, "you're doing everything you can. We all are. But you need to rest." Claire shook her head. "I can't. If I don't fight this with everything I have, Charlie could end up with someone who doesn't even care about him." Margaret sighed. "You have to trust that the truth will come through. That judge saw Tom's cracks. He saw Rachel's love for her son. It's not just you fighting for Charlie, it's all of us." But Claire wasn't so sure. The system had let children down before. Would it fail Charlie too? The final court hearing arrived with the ominous weight of a storm cloud. Rachel had agreed to testify, but her nervousness was palpable. She clutched her hands tightly in her lap as she waited to be called. Charlie sat beside her, fidgeting with the small gift he still hadn't opened, now crumpled and worn from weeks of handling. Claire and Margaret sat on his other side, their presence a steadying force. Tom's lawyer began the proceedings with a barrage of arguments painting him as the better option for custody. He presented pay stubs and glowing references from co-workers, glossing over the years of absence with vague excuses about needing to get his life together. Tom himself sat with a carefully neutral expression, though Claire noted the faint smirk that crept across his face whenever the lawyer emphasized his biological connection to Charlie. When Rachel took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. She spoke with trembling but earnest words about her struggles, admitting her faults but never wavering in her love for her son. "I left him that night because I thought I was doing the right thing," Rachel said, her voice cracking. "I thought I was sparing him from the mess I'd made of my life, but I see now that leaving him was the worst thing I could have done. He deserves stability, yes, but he also deserves love, real love, and Claire has given him that." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Claire was called to testify, her heart pounded in her chest. She spoke of Charlie's growth in the weeks he had been with her family, of the bond he'd formed with Lily, and the joy he brought to their lives. "He's a remarkable boy," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion welling in her throat. "He's been through so much, but he still finds ways to laugh and hope. He deserves a home where he feels safe and loved, not just a place to sleep." Finally, it was Charlie's turn. He stood before the courtroom, clutching the small gift in his hands like a talisman. His voice wavered, but his words were clear. "I don't want to go with Tom," he said, glancing nervously at the man in question. "I don't know him. He didn't help me and Mom when we needed him." Charlie looked at Claire then, his wide eyes filled with trust. "I want to stay with Claire, but I still love my mom. I want us all to be okay." The courtroom fell silent, his simple yet profound statement echoing in the stillness. Even the judge seemed moved, his stern expression softening as he nodded for Charlie to take his seat. When the judge retired to deliberate, the tension was suffocating. Rachel sat with her head in her hands, while Claire absently twisted a bracelet around her wrist. Margaret and Frank flanked Charlie protectively, their presence a quiet assurance that he wouldn't face the outcome alone. After what felt like an eternity, the judge returned. His voice was firm but compassionate as he addressed the room. "This case has been difficult," he began. "Each party here has expressed love and concern for Charlie, and it is clear that he is a child of remarkable resilience and spirit." He paused, his gaze sweeping the courtroom. "However, custody decisions are made with the child's best interest as the paramount consideration. In this case, I believe that uprooting Charlie from the stability he has found with Claire and her family would be detrimental to his well-being. Therefore, I am granting primary guardianship to Claire. A wave of relief washed over Claire, but the judge wasn't finished. That being said, Rachel has shown a genuine commitment to her son's welfare. She will be granted supervised visitation, with the opportunity to transition to joint custody should she demonstrate continued stability. As for Tom, the judge's voice hardened. Your request for custody is denied. Your history and motivations do not convince this court that you have Charlie's best interests at heart. Tom's face darkened, but he didn't argue. The gavel struck, and the case was closed. Outside the courthouse, the first flakes of snow began to fall. Rachel hugged Charlie tightly, her tears falling onto his hair. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "And I'm going to make things right. I promise." Claire stood nearby, her heart heavy with both relief and the weight of what lay ahead. As Rachel released Charlie and turned to leave, he called after her. "Wait!" She turned, her expression uncertain. Charlie held out the small gift he had carried for weeks. "I want to open it now, with you." Rachel's hands trembled as she helped him untie the ribbon and peel back the paper. Inside was a set of paints, bright and vivid, along with a folded note. Rachel read it aloud, her voice thick with emotion. "For Charlie, my artist," the note said. "Never stop creating. Love, Mom." Charlie threw his arms around her, and for the first time, Claire saw something new in Rachel's eyes: hope. The storm had passed, but the work of rebuilding was just beginning. The days following the court decision felt like stepping into a new season. Not quite spring, but the kind of late winter where the ice begins to thaw and the first signs of growth peek through. Charlie stayed with Claire, settling into a routine that now felt like home. The farmhouse buzzed with life, but this time it carried a lighter energy, as if the burden that had hung over everyone was finally lifting. Rachel visited regularly, her supervised meetings initially tense, but slowly easing into something more natural. She was staying at a nearby shelter, working odd jobs to save money for a stable home. Each time she came to the farmhouse, she brought something for Charlie: a sketch pad, a small box of chocolates, or simply stories of her day. Charlie, though cautious at first, warmed to her visits. He still clung tightly to Claire and Margaret, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. His smiles came more easily, and his laughter rang louder when he played with Lily. One evening, as Claire washed dishes in the kitchen, she heard Lily and Charlie giggling in the living room. Peeking in, she saw the two of them sprawled on the rug, their crayons and markers scattered around them. Lily was teasing Charlie about a drawing he'd made of the farmhouse, complete with exaggerated smoke curling out of the chimney. "Your clouds look like cotton candy," Lily teased, nudging him with her foot. "They're supposed to look like that," Charlie retorted, sticking his tongue out. "It's called imagination." The sound of their laughter was like music, and Claire leaned against the doorway, her heart swelling with a mix of pride and gratitude. Whatever challenges they had faced, moments like this made it all worth it. Rachel's visits grew longer as the weeks passed. One afternoon, as the sun melted the last patches of snow outside, she lingered on the porch with Claire after her scheduled time with Charlie. They sat side by side, their breath misting in the cool air. "I've been looking for an apartment," Rachel said, her voice tentative. "It's nothing fancy, but it's in a good neighborhood, close enough to see Charlie often." Claire nodded, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "That's good, Rachel. He needs you in his life." Rachel glanced at her, her expression conflicted. "I thought you'd resent me for all of this." Claire shook her head, a small smile curving her lips. "You made mistakes. We all have. But you came back for him. That's what matters." Rachel hesitated, then spoke the words that had weighed on her since the day she walked into the courtroom. "I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for leaving him. But seeing how you've cared for him, I'm grateful, Claire. I don't know if I could have done what you did." Claire reached out, resting her hand on Rachel's. "We're all doing the best we can, and he's lucky to have so many people who love him." The moment hung between them, fragile but genuine, a connection forged in their shared love for the same boy. As spring approached, Rachel received approval to begin unsupervised visits. Her first outing with Charlie was simple: a trip to the park where they fed ducks and sat on a bench talking about his drawings. When they returned to the farmhouse, Charlie was beaming, clutching a new sketchbook Rachel had given him. "Mom says I should draw something for the wall," he announced, showing Claire the blank first page of the book. "That's a great idea," Claire said, ruffling his curls. "I can't wait to see it." Over time, Rachel's visits became a regular part of Charlie's life. She was far from perfect, but she was trying, and Charlie could see it. Slowly, he began to trust her again. 1 year after the stormy Christmas Eve that had changed everything, the farmhouse was filled with warmth and the smell of roasting chicken. The dining table was set with mismatched plates and glasses, the imperfections of the scene only adding to its charm. Rachel had joined them for the evening, her face glowing with pride as she watched Charlie show off a new painting, a vibrant landscape of the farmhouse in spring. Margaret helped Lily carry a pie to the table, while Frank told one of his long-winded stories that everyone had heard a dozen times but still laughed at anyway. When dinner was served, Claire looked around the table, her heart swelling at the sight of this patchwork family. They weren't perfect, and the scars of their shared journey would always remain, but they had found something rare and beautiful, a way to move forward together. Charlie stood, holding a wrapped gift in his hands, the first he had chosen, and wrapped himself. He handed it to Claire, his eyes shining. "This is for you," he said shyly, "because you've given me so much." Claire opened the gift to reveal a painting, a portrait of her, Charlie, and Lily standing in front of the farmhouse, the sky behind them a swirl of vibrant colors. Tears pricked her eyes as she pulled him into a hug. "Thank you, Charlie," she whispered. "It's beautiful." As they all gathered around the table, the warmth of laughter and love filled the room. It wasn't a perfect ending. Rachel still had challenges to overcome, and Claire knew there would be hard days ahead. But for this moment, they had found a fragile peace, built on love, resilience, and the promise of a brighter future. And in that, there was victory. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to HeroKind Stories and share your thoughts in the comments. What moments resonated with you? How did Charlie, Rachel, and Claire's journey reflect the power of resilience and love? We'd love to hear your reflections. Thank you for joining us in this touching story.